I'm Rick Levine, and we're here at SoulFood Coffeehouse in Redmond, Washington, to talk about what's coming up for the month ahead. And the month ahead is actually shorter. Although the month is longer, the month ahead is shorter because it's already January 6th. That's the downside of doing this the first Wednesday night of every month. This month is as late as it can be. A couple of things before I start. It's a pretty interesting day today, yesterday, today, tomorrow, and we have an interesting time coming up. I just want to start off by acknowledging that it was 1 year ago today that I did the first Astrology Night without my longtime astrology partner, Jeff Jower. He was not feeling well. He was actually feeling quite lousy. And it was a few days later that he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer and passed 1 month after that. And so this time of year, this is the first anniversary, and it would just be remiss, I would be remiss if I didn't stop for a moment to acknowledge his absence and his presence here, and perhaps enough said for now. So, January 2016. You know, there's a part of me that's still struggling with the fact that the 90s are over. It's like, I mean, I consider myself, more of a futurist than someone who hangs out in the past, but boy, the time is flying by. For the record, I'm just coming off of a cold. I still have a bit of a cough. The doctor assures me I'm not contagious, but if I stop to cough in between, I apologize in advance. We'll see how an hour of talking taxes my lungs. I may talk a little slower than usual. And I may stop and sip a bit more tea than usual.
And to be precise, I said your infection is not.
And we have a doctor in the house who said, your infection may not be contagious, but you are. Thank you. So, the key piece of January 2016 is retrograde. We are coming off of a phase when all the planets are direct. From Earth's point of view, as a planet gets closer to Earth, it looks like it's moving backwards. They don't really move backwards, we know that, but from Earth's point of view, they appear to be moving backwards. Mercury is the planet that turns retrograde more often than any other planet. It's the fastest moving planet, and so the difference between its forward movement and its reverse is more obvious and more abrupt. If you were driving in a car 50 miles an hour, slammed on the brakes and put it into reverse, everyone in the car would notice. But if you were driving in that same car, maybe 100 feet an hour, and slammed on the brakes and put it into reverse, it might not be as shattering or as noticeable. This is why Mercury retrograde is so obvious, because the change of speed from forward to backward happens very quickly. Now, Mercury retrograde gets a bad rap in astrology because there's a lot of astrology that comes to us from the ancient tradition that's pretty judgmental. Everything is good or bad. Well, there may be bad boys, but there are no bad planets. Planets can be more difficult to work with, and Mercury retrograde can be difficult to work with. But it's not bad. And I'm sorry for all of my very astute colleagues who warn their clients, don't sign a contract, don't buy a house, don't buy a computer, don't travel, don't breathe while Mercury is retrograde, I say Mercury's retrograde for 3 weeks at a time, 3 times a year. You can't put your life on hold for what turns out to be a total of 3 times 4, 12 weeks, almost, is that right? 3 times 3. It's over 2 months a year when we shouldn't be signing anything. That's great, especially for those of you who are real estate agents or attorneys or have a life. But there is some truth behind it, and we want to dig into that today. So that's order 1 of business. This Mercury retrograde, this particular Mercury retrograde is pretty intense for a few reasons, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. The other thing that is significant is that Jupiter, the largest of all the planets, turns retrograde tomorrow, which means for all practical purposes, Jupiter is already not moving. Jupiter doesn't move very fast compared to Mercury. Mercury moves through a sign in 2 or 3 weeks when it's traveling fast. Jupiter takes a year to move through a sign. All the outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, each turn retrograde when they get closest to the Earth in their cycle, which means the Earth comes between the outer planet and the Sun. Mars is the same, incidentally. Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. The outer planets all go retrograde once a year, and they can go retrograde from 4 to 5.5 months, roughly. Jupiter turns retrograde tomorrow, and it will be retrograde until May. Now, quite frankly, I've looked back in my life, I've looked in client charts, I don't see a whole lot of something notable when the outer planets turn retrograde. I'm not saying it's unimportant. I'm just saying in the big scheme of things, and compared to Mercury and Venus and Mars retrograde, Jupiter is not quite as important. I told you about the graph. Nevertheless, Jupiter represents growth and opportunity. And as it begins its backward move, its backward motion over the next couple of days, we may find that the larger ideas in our life may feel like they're being put on hold or things are taking longer. However, I would assume that the Mercury retrograde is going to take precedence, and it'll be hard to discriminate the feeling of that Jupiter retrograde from the much louder, closer to Earth, noisier retrograde of Mercury. Now, Mercury turned retrograde yesterday morning, and it stays retrograde until January 25th. So virtually all of January is under the sponsorship, if you will, of Mercury retrograde. So what happens when Mercury goes retrograde, and why does it get such a bad rap? When a planet is closer to Earth than it is in its normal cycle, that's when it's retrograde. And when it's closer to Earth, just like a radio station nearby, its signal is louder. What this means is that Mercury and all that it represents is amped up in our life when Mercury is retrograde. Well, what's Mercury? Mercury is the communicator planet. Mercury is the fleet-footed heavenly messenger. Mercury is how we interact, it's how we think. Mercury is what we say, it's language, it's the intellectual function, it's everything cerebral. Mercury is all sending and receiving of information. Mercury is in charge of all interactions. You know, when you go somewhere and come home, that back and forth energy is Mercury. In fact, the word mercantile is a mercurial word. There is an exchange of goods, of ideas. So Mercury is that interchange planet. When that planet gets closer to Earth and when it gets louder, what happens is it's like driving in rush hour. There's more information on the wires, so they can get clogged. The bridges have more traffic on it, so they can get traffic jammed. So what happens is that when Mercury goes retrograde, sometimes the feeling is that there's too much going on, and it's almost like we have to shut down or we have to pull back, and we can get frustrated and want to go harder forward and kind of bust through the frustrations. That's when we sign the contract without reading it. That's when we make the purchase without really thinking about what we should be doing. That's when we make the stupid decisions, when we speak wrong, when we hear something and we misinterpret it, when we go following directions and it says right and we make a left without it. It's because we're in a hurry. It's because the energy is speeded up, not because, well, it's slowed down because there's so much. The volume is greater, is more intense. Do you understand what I'm saying here? In other words, it's not a bad idea to sign a contract or buy a house when Mercury is retrograde, as long as you don't go out one afternoon on a Mercury retrograde, see a house, fall in love with it, and make an offer that day and then buy it the next day. That's dumb. Now that's dumb any time of year, whether Mercury is retrograde or not, but we're more inclined. And I'm not saying that kind of thing has never worked out positively for someone, but we're more inclined to do that kind of action, reaction, when Mercury is retrograde. That's the problem. Now, having said that, under the spirit of full astrological disclosure, I should say that I woke up yesterday morning, turned my computer on, and there was nothing. I mean nothing. Now, I've been a computer owner of one or more computers since 1977, which makes me certainly an early adopter in computer realms. I've never once in that 38 years have had a computer just not turn on. Nothing I could do would make it go on. I checked all my cables, I unplugged. It was dead. DOA. Turned out to be a power supply. You know, $100 later I was back in operation, a few hours of lost time. But the point is, it happened on the day that Mercury stationed retrograde. So I'm not taking away the power of Mercury retrograde. I don't know if any of you have noticed, but I notice that almost every time I have a light bulb just go pop and burn out, like while it's on, or I turn a switch and the light bulb goes and it doesn't work, it's on a Mercury retrograde. Has anyone else ever noticed that? Have you paid attention to it? The largest internet outages, I'm talking about multi-state regional internet outages, both of them, there were two huge ones that happened on a Mercury retrograde. So I'm not saying, this is an intended double negative, I'm not saying there's nothing to this Mercury retrograde thing. I'm just saying that it's not because it's bad, it's because there's a lot of traffic. So how do we work with that? Remember also, Mercury, from Earth's point of view, looks like it's moving backwards, which means that normally, day by day, Mercury is stepping into new territory. But when Mercury turns retrograde, we're no longer moving into new territory intellectually, we're recovering old territory. We're reviewing, we're re-envisioning. The RE words are good Mercury retrograde words. And so, when Mercury turns retrograde, it's a good time to stop, take a breath, and to integrate and assimilate what's been going on, and to realize that if the plans that you've made that have been going forward are not moving quite as fast now, it's a really good idea to not push so hard against them that you'll end up hitting the stopped car in front of you, or make a wrong turn out of frustration, or get so excited that you do something like spend money or sign an agreement that you really didn't intend to. Mercury retrograde says, remember those old signs that were by the railroad tracks that said stop, look, listen? That's what Mercury retrograde is. It's basically a time to remember to give some space between the time something happens and the time we react. Now let's look at this Mercury retrograde from a more specific perspective of what's going on. And to do this, I want to take out all the planets out of the chart for just a moment. And I think we can do this by doing this, and we want to leave in Pluto and the Sun just for a minute here. Okay, so here we have a chart today for January 6th. And incidentally, you can see here on January 6th, without the noise of all the other planets, that the Sun at 15 degrees of Capricorn is lined up with Pluto at 15 degrees of Capricorn. The Sun lines up with each of the outer planets once a year, and yesterday, today, was the day in which the Sun lined up with Pluto. Pluto is the lord of the underworld. Pluto is the unconscious. It's about deep, intense, emotional, passionate transitions, processing. It's about possessions that change into something else. Pluto, as the lord of the underworld, it's all those things we can't know. It's all the things that are not on the surface. They're so intense that they don't express easily. Pluto is about everything that happens after death and before birth. The Tibetans call this the Bardo states, B-A-R-D-O. The states between death and rebirth, as written about in the Tibetan Book of the Dead or the Tibetan Book of the Dead and Living, these states are states that we experience every day of our lives. Every time someone says no to us, every time we let go of something, is a process involved with the death of an idea or the death of a feeling or the loss of something that then, like a caterpillar changing into a butterfly, changes into something else. So the fact that the Sun was lined up with Pluto today is interesting because today is also the day that, actually it was yesterday, that Mercury turned retrograde. But what I want to do here is I want to move this a day at a time backwards, and I want you to pay attention to Mercury. And I'm just going to run this Mercury backwards. Now, just actually, before you pay attention to any of this, let me just run this back to, there we go. So here we are in mid-November, and Mercury is direct, and it's approaching the Sun. Now, Pluto moves so slowly that it's still in mid-Capricorn. I mean, Pluto's in Capricorn for nearly 20 years right now. So Mercury in mid-November is moving direct, catching up with the Sun. And on November 17th, Mercury on the far side of the Sun lines up with the Sun. Put that date in your mind for a moment. This is like the week or so before Thanksgiving. Mercury lines up with the Sun. Now Mercury is moving ahead of the Sun, and even though the Sun moves 1 degree every day, because it takes 360 days, 365 days, 360 degrees, the Sun moves about 1 degree every day. Mercury is moving even faster than that, and you can see the distance between Mercury and the Sun increasing. Mercury is getting farther and farther away from the Sun. Here by early December, Mercury is 10 degrees away from the Sun. And then Mercury moves into the next sign, Capricorn. And then on December 19th, key date, make this a note of this date in your head also. On December 19th, Mercury joined up with Pluto. Remember, today the Sun joins up with Pluto. So there may be things or issues that you thought about intellectually, mentally, Mercury, talked about, heard about, back in mid-December before Christmas, when Mercury was lining up with Pluto. You see, Mercury is the communicator, Pluto is the unconscious. When Mercury lines up with Pluto, we can get obsessed about things, but we can also dig down into the unconscious, bring things up, and things don't have a hold on us as much when they're out in the sunlight as they do when they're suppressed or hidden. So this is Mercury's job, to bring things out of the hidden and into light. So Mercury lines up with Pluto on December 19th, and this is an absolute key date. Thank you, Jeff, or Mercury, or something. I mean, there was a picture that's been on the wall for how long? Weeks? A week? 1 week, and boom. Yeah, the gods have spoken, or the goddess. So, Mercury on December 19th lined up with Pluto. Now, why this is so significant is through December, Mercury moved through Capricorn, and just on January 1st, the first day of the year, Mercury moved into the next sign, Aquarius. Let's follow that along here. By January 1st, there's Mercury into Aquarius. The sun is now getting closer to Pluto. Remember, Pluto hardly moves at all, so the sun catches up with Pluto. That would be today. But Mercury has turned retrograde. Mercury's move into Aquarius. Mercury's move into Aquarius is really like a tease, because Mercury moved into Aquarius, but it was already slowing down because Mercury can only get so far from the sun. It's about 15 degrees from the sun now. And as it does, it begins to slow down and then come back around on the other side, close in between the sun, between us and the sun. And so here's the thing. Mercury only spends 1 week in Aquarius, almost stationary, barely moving at all. And as we progress this along, we can see that on the 8th, let's see, where are we? Yes. On the 8th, Mercury moves back into Capricorn. So Mercury is only in Aquarius for a few days. Aquarius is futuristic, it's intellectual. Capricorn's more serious, it's more ambitious, it's more goal-oriented. So we have this glimpse in the first few days of the month of what's ahead. But meanwhile, Mercury is slowing down to retrograde, and then it retrogrades back into Capricorn, and as it continues retrograding, it by January 14th, it actually lines up with the sun. It lines up with the sun, but this time, instead of being on the far side of the sun, it's between the Earth and the sun. And so it's a very intense communication time that may in fact go back to this opening phase back when it lined up with the sun in November. However, Mercury continues to retrograde, remember, until January 25th. And on January 22nd, Mercury again lines up with Pluto, this time going backwards. Now remember I said keep that date in mind of that Mercury lining up with Pluto back the week before Christmas on December 17th. Because now Mercury is retrograded as far back as it goes. And so from December 17th all the way through January 22nd, as Mercury has retrograded back from the 5th of January to the all the way back to the 25th, Mercury's covering territory it's already seen. And then it lines up with Pluto again, so we're not done with these intense, powerful issues, these issues of bringing stuff up, these issues of intense feelings that are coming to the surface. And then Mercury turns direct. It conjuncts Pluto again, the end of the month. So really, the last week of January, Mercury is hanging out around Pluto. But it's not until, and I just want to run this far enough forward, it's not until February 15th, actually February 13th, 14th, that Mercury moves back into Aquarius and then finally starts moving into new ground. So from the first of the year until mid-February, there's this intellectual piece that's really holding on to the past and continuing cycling around old stuff rather than moving into new territory. Okay. So we started out and we spent quite a bit of time on this Mercury thing because I wanted you to see how this Mercury moves back and forth. Mercury is like the early warning system of the planets. It's our language, it's our communication faculty, but it's not the whole picture. And right now, we have Mercury just changing signs from Capricorn into Aquarius. But we have another planet that just changed signs just the day before yesterday, also actually on the 3rd, and that is that Mars changed signs from Libra into Scorpio. Scorpio, Mars into Scorpio, Aquarius, Mercury into Aquarius, are fixed signs. They're more focused. They're more generating direction from the inside out, rather than waiting for something to happen. The significant piece about Mars and Scorpio, which we'll talk about more next month and over the months ahead, is the fact that normally Mars spends 6 to 8 weeks in a sign. Every other year, Mars turns retrograde. And when it does, it can spend up to 8 months in a sign. So what happens with Mars is that it moves into Scorpio. It moved into Scorpio the beginning of January. It moves into Sagittarius, the next sign, the beginning of March. So it's 2 months. 2 months in Scorpio, and then it moves into Sagittarius. But then in April, Mars turns retrograde. At the end of May, Mars moves back into Scorpio, and it stays in Scorpio all the way through August. So again, we have these tides within tides that happen within life that we don't often notice, rhythms within rhythms. And as Mars moves into Scorpio, how we move forward. Mars is our forcefulness, it's our assertiveness. When it's too assertive, it's aggressiveness. Mars is the warrior planet, but you see, in ancient astrology, Mars, like several of the other planets, did double duty. Mars we associate as the planet of Aries. So Mars is fiery and action-oriented and the warrior. But in ancient astrology, Mars also was the planet associated with Scorpio. And Scorpio has passion. It's a water sign, it's feeling. So we moderners have stripped away the passionate side of Mars in our understanding of it because we've substituted that with Pluto as the ruling planet of Scorpio. Now again, we'll come back to this over the months ahead because Mars is in Scorpio for a long haul. But the point is that Mars is a heavyweight in Scorpio because it's its own powerful sign. It's its domicile. It's its home. And as such, our feelings, that would be the Scorpio side, our passions are energized by Mars's presence there to the extent that we can become obsessive, we can become compulsive, we can become so driven that we don't know when to stop. You add to that the fact that the sun is lined up with Pluto yesterday, today, tomorrow, adds another layer of that. And then you add to that the fact that Mercury, which lined up with Pluto, because Pluto's Scorpio's modern ruling planet, you add to that the fact that Mercury lined up with Pluto back the week before Christmas and will again toward the end of this month, and you begin to see why this period of time has such a depth and an intensity to it, stuff coming out that was hidden, stuff coming, whether it's political or whether it's corporate, whether it's financial, whether it's emotional, whether it's personal, these things are coming out into the open, and it would behoove us to work with it rather than trying to suppress it. remember, Pluto, or the energy of suppressed energy is like a volcano. And that is that if it flows naturally and easily, it builds garden islands like Kauai. Like Hawaii. But if you block up the volcano, and if it can't express, then the pressure builds, and it becomes even more intense, and then there's an eruption that can take out an entire civilization. So in our personal lives, sorry for those of you who jumped, in our personal lives during this phase, it's really healthy to look at those things which could be eruptions if in fact we don't work to keep the energy flowing. Okay, what else we got? So here we are, January 6th, we have the Sun lined up with Pluto. We also, because remember we're coming off of this Uranus-Pluto square, which you're probably tired of me and every astrologer in the world talking about. I mean, it's been the astrology story since, 2010, 2013 for real, all the way up through 2015. And even though the energy is waning, it's still the main story, even though there are other stories that are coming in and out of it. Why it's become a main story right now is that the Sun, which conjuncted Pluto yesterday, today, tomorrow, will square Uranus over the next couple days, because Uranus and Pluto are still only within 1 degree of being exactly square. So on January 7th, the Sun squares Uranus, and this suggests a breakthrough. This is actually tomorrow. The breakthrough is those things which we've been holding in can come out now. Uranus doesn't like secrets. It doesn't like things that are hidden. It likes things in the open. Think of the lightning striking. When the lightning strikes, the lights go on. Aha! I see it all. I know it all. And even when it gets dark, you still remember what you knew. So I think that over the next day or two, we each and all might see or get some surprises. Meanwhile, Jupiter is turning retrograde, and by the 8th, Mercury retrogrades back into Capricorn. There's some weight building here, but you know, things have tides and backwashes. The tide comes in, but the undertow pulls out. We're coming into a new moon, and this new moon in Capricorn on January 9th, actually at 5:30 Pacific time on January 9th, that's Saturday. And let's get this to the exact, or close enough to the exact time here. Whoop, going the wrong way. Hang with me here a second. There we go. Okay, that's close enough. So here we have the new moon in Capricorn. Every new moon is a seed. Every new moon is the potential of the next lunar cycle, an emotional cycle. This new moon in Capricorn is special because it's the first new moon of 2016. It takes on an extra amount of significance because in some ways it's like planting the seed for the year. The seed for this year is one of ambition. Capricorn is about reaching the top of the mountain. It's one about calculating and then following through with one's plan. It's making a concrete plan and then executing it. And I think the significant thing about this new moon is the fact that Pluto is in the picture just a few hours before the new moon. The moon conjuncts Pluto and then squares Uranus. So there's this sense of all the things over the last few years that have been important are now coming to a focal point this week. And I think this is a great time to look back and look forward, to make an assessment about what's important. And we may even feel all the weight of Capricorn. It's about holding back. And we have another energy that's holding us back. And I'm going to go back up one day here. We're going by the hour now. Hold on. Bear with me here a second. You know, this is a warm-up. And no one here is coming to Brighton Bush, are they? I don't recognize any names. But you know, the Brighton Bush annual retreat, that's this weekend, so I'm going to be talking all weekend. And we have a full house. We have 25 people. Can't take any more. All right, hang on. Okay, so we skipped over one thing that's important, and it ties to this whole Capricorn energy of holding back. On January 8th, Venus, the planet of love, warmth, lines up with Capricorn, lines up with Saturn. Saturn is the planet that relates to Capricorn energy. Saturn holds back. Saturn is serious. Venus, warm. Saturn, cold. Venus, assimilating and merging, yummy. Saturn, stern, austere, naysaying. So this Venus-Saturn conjunction, in some ways, even though it's an optimistic Sagittarius, is still Capricornian-like because Saturn is the boss here. Venus says, I want it and I want it all, and Saturn says, not so fast. And so we go into the new moon with this idea of having to hold things back. And this becomes part of the flavor of the year. And that is, this sounds like a Baskin and Robbins menu, the flavor of the year. You can't have it all, and you can't do it all. And it's actually better if you don't. Meaning that when Saturn holds Venus back, we can be frustrated and say, but I want it now. And Saturn says, that which you wait for, that which you work for, that which lasts, endures, is better than that which happens immediately and is gone in 10 minutes. So this is the lesson of the Capricorn new moon, especially tied to the Venus-Saturn conjunction, January 9th. The days after that, though, are really interesting because just as Venus comes off that conjunction with Saturn, and as the moon moves into Aquarius, by the 12th, Venus in Sagittarius is making a trine to Uranus. And this is almost the opposite of Saturn restraint. This is about newer, different, better, that it's exciting, there's anticipation, it's out of the box, it's unconventional, it's radical, and it's sweet, yum. So this in some ways says that if you know how and when to hold back, you can also go for it. And that happens also around the same time that Jupiter is retrograding back into a trine with the Sun, and Mercury is coming into that mix. So you see Mercury here is retrograding back toward the Sun, as it does over those days. You can see right there by the 14th, 15th, Mercury is on the other side of the Sun. And as it's doing that, the Sun and Mercury are harmonizing, making a trine with Jupiter. Well, it doesn't get any sweeter than this, except Mercury is retrograde. So again, there's this kind of looking ahead and seeing the opportunity and seeing the room for expansion and having the big ideas, but maybe not being able to communicate it all or say it all or do it all right away. Again, there's this bit of restraint even around everything that looks so good. But I do think this 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th period after the coming off the new moon is actually quite sweet. Even through the 14th, when Mars trines Neptune, Mars, moving now through Scorpio, is going to trine Neptune, and interestingly enough, this is setting up, remember Mars is in Scorpio for the long haul, and this trine from Mars to Neptune is about the magic of working with the alchemistry of emotions. Mars is how we go forward. In Scorpio, it's with intensity and passion and desire and an unrelenting drive to get to the merge point. Scorpio both desires the merge and fears it because it's death. You know, that whole idea of in the medieval or era, the poets would write about orgasm as a little death. And this idea of the merge, the ego has to let go. And I know many of you have heard one of my favorite quotes from Trungpa Chogyam Rinpoche, the founder of Naropa, who said that enlightenment is the ego's greatest disappointment. Enlightenment is the ego's greatest disappointment. Now, Scorpio wants the enlightenment because it wants that merge. It wants to drop the boundary between self and other, and to have that intensity of being at one with the object of one's desire rather than desiring an object. However, Scorpio also fears that state of egolessness because there's no control. And Scorpio, as we know, has certainly has issues around that whole sense of control. So there's this dance that we do, and as Mars in Scorpio forms a harmonious trine with Neptune on, where'd that day go? It was just here.
It's the 14th.
There it is. On the 18th, it's actually exact. Yeah, we're on the 14th here. Mars is already at 6 degrees. It's coming in close, but you can see that by the 17th, 18th is when that trine is exact. This is a slow enough moving aspect that you'll feel it for days. And often, by thinking of these aspects as radio stations, if we go looking for it early, we can hear it before other people do. You know, I have this little thing in my life that if I'm out in the evening and I know that Jupiter or Mars or Venus is visible, I'll often sit and wait. I want to be the first person to see it. Okay, I'm an Aries. I like being first. But it's there whether someone sees it or not. But if you experience and understand a rhythm, you can gain awareness of what that means and work with it. So the fact that Mars is coming to a trine with Neptune, Neptune is about dreams, it's about imagination, it's about illusions. I know illusions get a bad rap, but as my friend Caroline Casey says, and I often quote her, imagination lays the tracks for the reality train to follow. William Blake wrote, "What is now proved was once only imagined." So there's nothing wrong with dreams and illusions and imagination, Neptune's realm. There's only a problem with it if we think it's real rather than work at making it real. You see the difference? So, when Mars trines Neptune, we have the ability to do shape-shifting. We have the ability to practice real magic. I don't mean cheap stage tricks, although I love them, you know, of pulling cards out of the air and aces up sleeves and whatever. That's all wonderful. But that's trickery. This is real magic. It's about shifting the energy. And Mars in Scorpio trining Neptune is about using self-hypnosis or guided imagery or meditation or ritual to actually transform one's feelings into something that may be a higher or more powerful state of being. So I think this is a really important aspect. And then just a couple of days later, the sun moves from Capricorn into Aquarius. Aquarius is futuristic. I always find it interesting that this is the coldest time of year in many parts of the country in the northern hemisphere. And yet there's something about when the sun moves into Aquarius, the end of January through February, it's almost like we can see spring far off. It doesn't matter how cold it is. But it's like something's coming out on the horizon, far off. And that's what Aquarius is about. Aquarius is about the weird future that's not now, but it's on the way. Everything about Aquarius is weird. Aquarius is the weirdest sign of the zodiac. It's the water bearer, but it's an air sign. And it's symbols of the waves that look like either electricity, like a current, or like ocean waves. The fact of the matter is that if air is dry, it doesn't conduct electricity. Anyone ever lived in the Midwest? I lived in Minnesota many years, and when it was dry in the winter, you couldn't shake anyone's hand in the winter without creating a spark. Everything you touched would ground you because you built up a charge because there was no electricity flowing. And then you go and you live in the tropics where it's really warm and moist, and the spirits are everywhere. The energy flows. It's almost like it's really different from Norway to Ecuador or Bali. The energy is such that moisture is required for electricity to flow. In the body, our nervous system is electrical. But nerves travel by what's called the potassium-sodium exchange. And without water, there's no electricity that flows. So Aquarius is the water bearer. It's when there's moisture in the air, then information can be distributed. Aquarius is our nervous system. Aquarius is intellectual, it's mental. But it's not like Mercurial, which is about a particular thought. Aquarius is about the distribution system of all thinking. So Aquarius is definitely apersonal, meaning that it's not just a human pouring a bucket of water, it's humanity. Jeff used to say that Aquarius is, how did he say it? Aquarius loves humanity. It's the humans they hate. Aquarius has the sense of detachment, that it's an emotional detachment that's about perspective. When you're looking at the future, things seem far away, but you can have perspective on it. So that's what Aquarius is. It's the brilliance, it's the conceptual brilliance that we can have of something that we're not emotionally engaged with. And as the sun moves into Aquarius on January 20th, we begin that Aquarius time of year when we begin thinking about what's ahead in a much different way. Now remember, Mercury is still moving retrograde. In fact, it's joining up with Pluto over the next few days, so there's still some intensity cooking. But over the next few days, what happens is Venus moves from Sagittarius into Capricorn. We begin a period of time with Venus in Capricorn. I mean, we've had so much energy in Capricorn over the past month or so that we may not even notice Venus being there, except we become a bit more serious about what we want, Venus, what we want, what we desire. And it'll be interesting to watch that Venus as it catches up with Pluto over the next month. That's not for today, that's for next month. But as Mercury turns direct, Mercury catches up with Pluto again. Venus is in Capricorn. There's that sense of I want to be in the future. The sun is in the future. And yet there's so much holding me back through the end of the month that it's difficult to get away from it. Now we just skipped over, and I'm going to come back to the full moon on January 25th. Let's just get the moon back in there, and we'll get that moon to, that's a little bit too far, and there we go. There we go. So the moon is full. That's close enough. The moon is actually full at 5:45 p.m. Pacific time on January 23rd. Now the critical piece about this full moon is that Venus has just stepped into Capricorn. Something's changing. The moon is full. It's about something coming to fruition. The moon is in Leo, heartfelt, but the sun is in Aquarius, which is not about the heart. You see, the heart pumps the blood, but the circulation system is about getting the blood to everywhere in the body. So this dance between me and the collective. It's not me and you, or me and you, or me and you. It's me and the all. That's what the Leo Aquarius axis is. On top of that, Mercury turns direct just a few hours after. Actually, no, it actually turns direct the following day. So, but Mercury is already stationary and getting ready to turn around. That Mercury is so close to Pluto that this full moon becomes very intense, because these same issues, the same feelings that we maybe had the week or so before Christmas when the sun was lined up with Pluto, and then again when Mercury was lined up with Pluto the beginning of the month, now is again back in, when the sun was lined up with Pluto, back January 5th, now again these issues are up again, and we have another chance to dig down and to get it right, to look back over the last month and a half, and figure out how we can take this forward. And we begin to do that on the 25th as Mercury turns direct. And even though it's several days before Mercury moves back into Aquarius, it moves back into Aquarius on February 13th, the fact of the matter is that we're already getting forward motion, and we're feeling like the year is finally taking off. What's interesting in all of this is that, and we talked about Mercury making this conjunction with Pluto, but I also want to finish this point here with Mercury also making a square to Uranus. And remember, I talked over and over again about the Uranus-Pluto square, that and it's now, as Mercury is moving through that point again, we get another blast on it. All of these global issues that we've seen in our face over the last several years, they'll be back again. They haven't gone away, but the news will be, by the end of the month, will be screaming again with all these issues as Mercury conjuncts Pluto, hangs out there and squares Uranus. But then the energy moves on. By the end of the month and by the beginning of March, I think we're feeling like we're finally into new territory. On March 6th, when Mars moves into Sagittarius, it feels like we're finally getting somewhere and we're going somewhere new. And I think that February largely is a month where we're integrating, where we're adjusting. I know I said some of these same things last month, but that's part of what's going on. But a lot of the energy is about looking back and pulling in, which is odd for the beginning of the year when we really should be looking, or we normally would be looking ahead. So I think the key with Mercury retrograde most of this month is that if you're not moving as fast as you thought you would be this year, if the ideas that you had for 2016 aren't gaining traction, don't go negative, go deep. That's the Pluto piece. Because the deeper we go, the deeper we can dig, the more we can use Mercury as the psychopomp who is able to go back and forth between this world and the hell realms. Use Mercury to go into the unconscious, bring the energy up, and bring it into the light where we can see it, and where we can dance with it, and where we can work with it, because that's the way to make the magic happen. Another month. Thank you all, and see you next time.